A place to be, to groom your words, a place that is secured for the rest of mine. No other place but burial schools is the best.
Good morning, students. You're welcome to class. Today we are going to be looking at the activities of living things. This is a basic science class for Jss1. Today we'll be looking at the activities of living things. We're going to be talking about what living things are and what they do. Activities here simply talks about your daily routine, what you do always. And living things, like we know, are things that have life in them. Life in them meaning that they are able to carry out certain activities that differentiates them from non-living things. Activities, like I said, are the things done by these living things, and we're going to be looking at the activities carried out by living things. We'll be using an acronym to give us everything, all the 8 activities carried out by living things. The acronym is Mr. Niger D. Now the first letter here stands for movement. The second one is respiration. The third one is nutrition. The fourth one is irritability. The fifth one is growth. Number 6 is excretion. 7 is reproduction. And the last letter represents death. We're going to explain, or we're going to be learning how most of these activities are being carried out by living things. The first one we have is movement, as you can see on the board. Movement here simply means the ability for living organisms to change their position. I'm sure you're beginning to ask, change position, how? We don't just use the word move from one place to another, because not all living things can move from one place to another. Some living things, their movement is not very visible. Living things are grouped into 2. We have the animals and we have plants. And as we all know, movement in plants is not as visible as movement in animals. Movement here has 2 forms. The first one is the active movement. That is to say, we have 2 types of movement. We have the active movement and the passive movement. Active movement, passive movement. We have the active movement and the passive movement. Active movement here is carried out by animals. This is where you have the movement from one place to another. While the passive movement is found in plants. They don't necessarily move from one place to another, but movement is still being carried out by plants. They carry out 2 types of movement, known as the tropism and the nastic movement. Nastic movement has to do with the movement tropism here is when these plants try to derive sunlight. They find a way to go towards the direction where there is sunlight so that they can manufacture their food. Okay? We've been talking about movement, and we're going to be looking at what locomotion and habitat is. Locomotion simply talks about, okay, so active movement here, like we said, is a movement from one place to another, the general body movement. That will now bring us to two types of respiration. We have the aerobic respiration and the anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration here takes place in the presence of oxygen. It's the respiration that takes place in the presence of oxygen. While anaerobic respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen. It's a process also known as fermentation. We're moving forward to the next letter we have in the acronym, which is letter N. Letter N here stands for nutrition. Nutrition simply any organism dies, it no longer carries out these other activities that are being carried out by living organisms. Okay, we've talked about the different activities carried out by living organisms. We're going to be looking at why these activities are important to the organisms. Why must they carry them out? Why must they do these things? Why should they eat? Is it important? Is it necessary? We're going to be looking at why it is important. We'll start with movement. Now, movement is important to living organisms because it enables them run from danger. Movement is important, especially the active movement. Running from danger, search for food, run for shelter or search for shelter in case of anything, and so on. Now, the passive movement is also important because if the roots do not make any movement to be able to get nutrients, then the plants will certainly not do well. So movement also in plants is important. And remember also that plants need sunlight to enable them manufacture or produce their food. So the tropic movement or the tropism is also important, whereby these other plants try to tilt towards any direction where they see sun rays or sun coming from to enable them manufacture their food. Now the second one we have is respiration. Why is respiration important? We are looking at the importance of the activities of these living organisms, and we talked about how important movement is to all living organisms. Like I said earlier, it helps them look for food, find shelter, and also run away from danger. Respiration here helps in the breaking down of complex organic compounds to release energy, which is necessary for all the metabolic activities and physical activities carried out in the body. Nutrition enables them when they eat, they're able to get the essential nutrients that they need to provide them with energy and to also replenish their skin and replace worn-out cells. Now, irritability here helps to detect and respond to selected external stimuli. And then growth. All living things grow, like I said when we were explaining it. They grow, develop as a result of cell division and enlargement. Excretion is important because living things are able to remove or take out toxic waste from the body. Now, reproduction here, it helps in continuity of life. For instance, if no one is giving birth, then that particular family will eventually come towards extinction. For instance, your mom gave birth to you, or your grandmother gave birth to your parents, and your parents gave birth to you, and it continues like that. For the purpose of what? Continuity. Reproduction is very important. Now, for the last one here, death. Existence is not permanent. Like I said, it's a transition phase from being a living thing to becoming a non-living thing. Death, we might say, is a problem, it's not a good thing, but death is also important for existence. Now, for instance, if nobody dies, imagine the number of persons we will have in existence currently. So over time, other organisms have to give way for the new organisms to be able to do well. Let's use, for instance, having a garden. If you have your spinach sprinkled or poured in a particular area, these things germinate. If the place is overcrowded, some of the organisms will certainly die. Or the whole vegetation or vegetables you planted there will not do well. So I'll see you in our next class. But before we leave, I'd like you to do a little research on your own. So you're going to be doing